My husband demanded a divorce at 67. "I'll take everything from you," my lawyer shouted. "Fight to the end." But I calmly gave him every last cent. My ex celebrated with his friends. I was laughing, he forgot that. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. People always ask me how I stayed so calm, how I stood in my own kitchen, in the house I had lived in for 38 years, and smiled while my husband told me he wanted everything I had ever built. They expect tears, they expect begging. What they don't expect is a woman of 67 years old who has already done her math. Let me start at the beginning, not the dramatic beginning, not the courtroom, not the lawyers shouting, not the champagne Donald popped with his friends the night he thought he'd won. The real beginning, the quiet one, the one that smelled like coffee and cut grass on a Sunday morning in Charleston. Donald and I met in 1979 at a church social in Mount Pleasant. He was tall, charming, with a head full of dark hair and a laugh that filled a room. I was 27, teaching third grade, and foolish enough to believe that a man who danced well was a man worth trusting. We married the following spring. We had 2 children, Karen and Robert. We built a life. Not a perfect life, but a solid one, a real one, the kind that takes 40 years of small decisions to construct. Our house on Palmetto Drive had a wraparound porch, a fig tree in the backyard that Karen used to climb, and a kitchen where I had cooked approximately 10,000 meals. I had a garden. I had a book club on Thursdays. I had my grandchildren, 3 of them, who came over every Saturday and left fingerprints on everything I owned. I was not a woman without purpose. I was not a woman who had been waiting to live. But somewhere around the spring of my 66th year, something shifted. I noticed it the way you notice a crack in a wall, slowly, then all at once. Donald started keeping his phone face down on the table. I told myself he was just tired of notifications. He began taking longer showers. I told myself his back was bothering him and the hot water helped. He started going to the hardware store on Saturday afternoons and coming home 2 hours later than he should have, carrying nothing. I told myself he probably ran into someone from the Rotary Club. I was good at telling myself things. Then came the business trips. Donald had retired from his property management firm 4 years prior, so business trips had no logical explanation. But when I asked, he said he was consulting. Freelance. Old clients who still needed him. I had spent 40 years learning not to press. That was my training. That was my mistake. The first real crack came in October. I found a receipt in the pocket of his blue jacket, the one I was taking to the dry cleaner. Dinner for 2 at a restaurant on Sullivan's Island, a nice one. The kind we hadn't been to together in 3 years. The date was a Tuesday. On that Tuesday, Donald had told me he was in Columbia for a meeting. I put the receipt in my own pocket. I said nothing. But I started paying attention in a different way. Not with hope, with documentation. Over the next 2 months, I wrote things down. Dates, times, inconsistencies. I am a retired school teacher. I know how to keep records. I found a second phone, a prepaid one, in the glove compartment of his car when I borrowed it in November because mine was in the shop. I didn't touch it. I photographed it with my own phone. Then I put it back exactly where it was. By December, I knew about Cindy Marsh. She was 45 years old, recently divorced, and worked at the golf club where Donald played on Thursdays. I had never met her. I had seen her photograph on the club's website once, years ago, and forgotten her entirely. She had not forgotten Donald. I was still deciding what to do when Donald made the decision for me. It was a Wednesday evening in January. I had made pot roast. The grandchildren had been over that afternoon, and the house still smelled like them. Like crayons and apple juice and something sweet. Donald sat down at the table, looked at me across 38 years of shared meals, and said, without raising his voice, "I want a divorce, Peggy. And I want you to know I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm going to get the house, half your pension, and the investment accounts. You'll walk away with almost nothing. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for you." He said it the way you'd announce a change in dinner plans. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I picked up my fork. "All right, Donald," I said. "If that's what you want." He blinked. He had expected crying. He had expected a scene. What he got was a 67-year-old woman calmly eating pot roast. And that was his first mistake. I didn't sleep that night. I want to be honest about that. I lay in the guest bedroom. I moved there that same evening, quietly, without drama. And I stared at the ceiling, and I felt afraid. Real fear. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone and doesn't move when you breathe. I was 67 years old. I had worked for 31 years as a schoolteacher before I retired at 62. My pension was real but modest, about $1,900 a month. Donald's income had always been higher, but what mattered more was the structure of what we had built together. The house on Palmetto Drive, which we owned outright, was appraised at $640,000 the previous spring. We had joint investment accounts, roughly $280,000 between two funds that Donald managed. We had a joint savings account, and there was Donald's own retirement account from his years at the firm, which I had a spousal claim to under South Carolina law. I had given up my own career advancement more than once for this family. I had taken the summers off without pay to be with the children when they were small. I had turned down a department head position in 2001 because Donald was expanding the business, and someone had to be reliable at home. I had made myself the foundation so that he could build higher, and now he intended to knock the foundation out from under me. I thought about Karen. She would be furious when she found out. She had always been perceptive about her father, more perceptive than Robert, who still believed Donald was simply a man going through something. I thought about the house, the fig tree, the porch where I drank my coffee every morning and watched the light change over the yard. I thought about being 67 years old and having to start from nothing in a rental apartment somewhere. The fear lasted until about 3 a.m. Then something else took over. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when you've been afraid long enough that the fear burns itself out and leaves something clean behind. I sat up in the dark and I started thinking like a teacher, like someone who had spent 31 years breaking complicated problems into manageable steps. What did I actually have? What did I actually know? And what could I actually do? By the time the sun came up, I had the outline of something. Not a revenge fantasy. A plan. Quiet, legal, and based entirely on information Donald had already handed me without realizing it. The first thing I understood, clearly, without illusion, was that my lawyer mattered more than my feelings. I could not afford to walk into this emotionally. I had seen it happen to women I knew. They hired whoever was convenient. They got overwhelmed. They accepted settlements that left them diminished. I would not do that. I knew of a woman named Gloria Tran, a family law attorney in Charleston who had a reputation for being precise, aggressive, and deeply unsentimental. I had heard her name at my book club 2 years prior, when my friend Eleanor's niece had gone through a difficult divorce. Gloria had reportedly told that niece's husband in a deposition, "Sir, I have read every document you thought you hid." I liked that. I called Gloria's office at 8:15 that morning, before Donald was even awake. The second thing I understood was that I needed to stop thinking of assets as things and start thinking of them as positions. The house, the accounts, the pension. Each one was a piece on a board, and Donald thought he knew how the board was arranged. He did not know that I had spent 2 months writing things down. I retrieved my small notebook from the hiding spot I'd been using, inside a hollowed-out gardening reference book on the bottom shelf of the sunroom bookcase. I read through everything I had recorded: the receipts, the dates, the prepaid phone, the trip to Colombia that wasn't. None of it was enough on its own, but it was a beginning. The third thing I understood was perhaps the most important. Donald expected me to fight desperately for everything. He expected me to cling and argue and make noise. His lawyer had probably advised him that I would, and that he could use my desperation against me. So I decided not to be desperate. I decided to be something much harder to fight. I decided to be patient. I closed my notebook. I made coffee. I went out to the porch and watched the fig tree in the gray January light. A plan was not yet complete, but its shape was clear. And for the first time since Wednesday evening, the stone in my chest was smaller. Donald walked past the porch window at 8:40. He didn't look at me. Good, I thought. Let him think this is already over. Gloria Tran's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Broad Street in the old part of Charleston. The kind of building with tall windows and wooden floors that creaked when you walked on them. She was 52, small, with short dark hair, and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. She shook my hand once, firmly, and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me everything," she said, "and don't apologize for the length." I appreciated that. I sat down, opened my notebook, and told her everything. 40 minutes, start to finish. The receipts, the phone, the trips, the dinner on Sullivan's Island, the Tuesday that was supposed to be Columbia. I told her what Donald had said at the dinner table, verbatim. I told her about the investment accounts, the house, the pension, the timeline of my career sacrifices. She listened without interrupting. She took her own notes. When I finished, she took off her glasses and set them on the desk. "He has retained Mitchell Pruitt," she said. "I know him. He is not incompetent, which means Donald has been planning this longer than January." That landed. I had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed in someone else's voice made it real. "How long?" I asked. Hard to say without documentation. But attorneys like Pruitt don't get retained for impulsive decisions. I'd estimate 6 months minimum, possibly a year. A year. While I was making pot roast and tending my garden and reading books on Thursday evenings, Donald had been building a legal architecture designed to dismantle everything I had. "What do I have?" I asked. Gloria looked at her notes. "More than he thinks. South Carolina is an equitable distribution state, which does not mean equal. It means fair, based on contributions. 38 years of marriage, documented career sacrifices, shared asset building, all of that factors. His affair, while not automatically decisive, becomes relevant if we can show marital waste or dissipation of assets. Did he use joint funds on the girlfriend?" "I don't know yet," I said. "That," she said, "is what we need to find out." She sent me home with a list. Bank records going back 2 years. Credit card statements, all cards, including any I might not know about. Retirement account documents, the investment fund statements, property records. She told me to gather everything I could access legally without alerting Donald, and to bring it back within 10 days. I nodded. I went home. I made lunch. Donald was watching television in the den, and he glanced at me when I came in and said nothing. He had adopted a careful, distant politeness, the behavior of a man who has been told by his lawyer to avoid conflict. I smiled at him and asked if he wanted a sandwich. He said yes. I made him one. Over the next 5 days, I went through everything I could reach. Joint accounts, I had full legal access. I printed statements going back 26 months. I went through the filing cabinet in Donald's study, which he had not thought to lock because he had underestimated me for 38 years. I found a credit card I had not known existed, opened 18 months ago in his name only. The statements showed restaurant charges, hotel stays, a weekend in Savannah in September, a jewelry purchase in November for $380. November. The same month I had found the prepaid phone in his car. I photographed every page. I put the originals back exactly where I had found them. Then I found something else. In a manila envelope at the back of the bottom drawer, behind the hanging files, was a document I had to read 3 times to understand fully. It was a preliminary transfer agreement, drafted but unsigned, that appeared to be an attempt to move a portion of the investment accounts into a separate holding structure. The kind of structure that would make those funds harder to classify as marital assets. The document was dated 11 months ago. My hands were steady when I photographed it. I was surprised by that. I think I was steady because the document answered a question I had been afraid to ask. This had not been impulsive. This had been calculated. Donald had spent nearly a year preparing to diminish me financially before he ever sat down at that dinner table. The anger that came then was different from fear. It was cold, useful. I brought everything to Gloria 3 days later. She looked through the photographs on my phone and said one word: good. Meanwhile, across town, Donald had lunch with Cindy Marsh at a restaurant on King Street. She reportedly asked him, over their second glass of wine, why I hadn't called a lawyer yet. He told her I probably wouldn't, that I wasn't that kind of woman. He was still wrong about what kind of woman I was. Gloria filed the initial divorce response on a Tuesday morning in February. Standard procedure, she told me. A formal answer to Donald's petition, establishing that I was represented and contesting the terms. Nothing dramatic. A piece of paper, but the piece of paper contained something Donald had not expected: a formal discovery request. We were asking for full financial disclosure, every account, every asset, every transaction over the past 2 years, including the credit card I wasn't supposed to know about, including the investment account transfer document I wasn't supposed to have seen. I was in my sunroom, rereading a novel I had started before all of this began, when Donald came home that afternoon. I heard the front door, the silence, and then his footsteps, faster than usual, coming toward the sunroom. He stood in the doorway, holding papers. His face had gone a particular shade of red I had only seen a few times in 40 years of marriage. Once when he'd had an argument with his business partner. Once when Robert had wrecked the car at 17. "What is this?" he said. "Those appear to be legal documents," I said. I kept my finger in my book. "You hired Gloria Tran." "I did." "Peggy." His voice shifted, lower, more controlled. The voice he used when he wanted to seem reasonable. "This is going to get expensive and ugly for both of us. Tran is a pit bull. She will drag this out for years. Is that what you want?" "I want what's fair, Donald." "What's fair?" He repeated it like I'd said something absurd. "You're 67 years old. You want to spend the next 2 years in a courtroom?" I looked at him. "How long have you been planning this?" He was quiet for 1 second too long. "I don't know what you mean," he said. "The transfer document in the bottom drawer," I said. "The one dated 11 months ago. The credit card I didn't know about. The hotel in Savannah in September." The red in his face changed quality. It became something harder. "You went through my things." "Our things," I said. "Joint property. My attorney will be happy to explain that." He left the room. I heard him on his phone in the kitchen, his voice low and clipped, the way it got when he was talking to Pruitt. 20 minutes later, he came back. Mitchell says we can still settle this quietly, he said, without the discovery process, without all of this becoming public record. I'm sure he does, I said. Peggy, I'm serious. If you push this, I will make sure the process is as difficult as possible. I know people on the assessor's board. I can complicate the property valuation. Mitchell has done this before. He knows how to slow things down until the legal fees eat up whatever you think you're going to get. I looked at him for a long moment. He stood in the doorway of the sunroom, a room I had furnished, in a house I had kept, on a street where I had built a life. And he threatened me. Calmly. Specifically. I said, "Thank you for telling me all of that, Donald. I'll pass it along to Gloria." He stared at me. Then he walked out. I heard his car leave the driveway 20 minutes later. I sat alone in the sunroom, and I let myself feel it. All of it. The anger and the grief and the indignity of being threatened in my own home. I let myself feel it fully, because I knew I would need to be steady later. And you cannot be steady if you're carrying things you haven't set down properly. Then I called Karen. She came the next morning with groceries, and we sat on the porch for 3 hours. I told her most of it. Not all. I didn't want to burden her with the parts that were still in motion. But enough. She cried in a way I didn't. She said things about her father that I won't repeat here. I just held her hand. After Karen left, I called Eleanor, my oldest friend, the one from book club, the one who had been married and widowed and rebuilt herself twice. I told her I needed a few days somewhere quiet. She had a cottage on Edisto Island. She lent me the key without asking a single unnecessary question. That is what a real friend does. I spent 4 days at Edisto. I walked on the beach every morning. I slept 8 hours a night. I read 2 novels. I did not check my phone except once a day. I came back on a Saturday, rested and clear. Donald was home when I arrived. He looked at me as I carried my bag through the front door, and I could see him recalibrating, trying to read me, and failing. Let him wonder, I thought. We're just getting started. It was a Sunday in late February, about a week after I returned from Edisto, when Donald changed tactics. I was in the kitchen making tea when he appeared in the doorway, wearing the blue sweater I had given him for Christmas 3 years ago. He had done that deliberately. I was almost certain of it. Donald was not a sentimental man, but he was a strategic one, and he understood, on some level, what symbols meant to me. "Peggy," he said, "can we talk? Not through lawyers, just us." I poured my tea. All right. He sat down at the kitchen table. Our kitchen table, the one we'd bought at an estate sale in 2003 because I had loved the worn oak surface. And he folded his hands in front of him. He looked older than he had in January. The confrontations had cost him something, which was only fair. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how this has gone. The way I handled things, the way I said things at dinner, that was harsh. I'm not proud of that." I waited. "I don't want this to become a war," he said. "I don't want attorneys and depositions and all of this ugliness. We're 67 and 71 years old. We have children and grandchildren. I think we can come to something reasonable without destroying each other." He paused. He was watching my face very carefully. "I'm willing to negotiate directly," he said. "Give you the house. Let you keep the full pension. We split the investment accounts cleanly and go our separate ways. No discovery, no drawn-out process. Just done." The offer was, on its surface, more generous than what he'd described at the dinner table in January, and I understood exactly why. The discovery process frightened him. Gloria's request meant that every financial transaction would be examined. The hidden credit card, the hotel stays, the transfer document, the jewelry in November. If those things entered the court record, they would damage him. Not just legally, socially. Donald Holloway cared enormously about how he appeared in this community. He had lived here for 40 years. He sat on the board of 2 local organizations. He played golf with men who talked. He was not offering me the house because he was generous. He was offering me the house because he wanted to stop the examination. "I appreciate that, Donald," I said. "I'll mention it to Gloria." Something flickered in his face. Frustration, quickly suppressed. "You don't need to run everything through her. We're adults. We can talk." "We are talking," I said, "and I've heard you. I'll mention it to Gloria." He left the room shortly afterward. I heard him on the phone again, his voice lower and tighter than usual. That particular tone told me everything I needed to know about how the call was going. I took my tea to the porch. The fig tree was beginning to bud. It always started early, even in February, in the warmth of the Charleston Low Country. I looked at it for a long time. The truth was this: I was not going to take Donald's private offer. Not because the terms were necessarily wrong, but because a private agreement would bury the financial record. It would protect him from the full examination of what he had done, not just the affair, which I had made a kind of peace with in my own way, but the deliberate financial planning, the hidden accounts, the attempt to shield assets, the year of calculated preparation while I made his meals and tended his home. I needed that in the record, not for revenge, for accuracy, for the simple insistence that what had happened should be known. I called Eleanor that afternoon. We talked for an hour on the porch. She listened in the way only someone who has been through real loss can listen, without minimizing and without dramatizing. She said, "Peggy, you are the most dangerous thing in this entire situation, and he still hasn't figured that out. A calm woman with documentation is unstoppable." I laughed, real laughter, the kind I hadn't had in a while. Karen called that evening. She had spoken to Robert, who was still trying to remain neutral, which was his right, and I didn't hold it against him. But Karen was not neutral. Karen had done her own quiet research into Cindy Marsh and had some thoughts. I told her to write them down, but not to act on anything independently. "Let Gloria drive," I told her. "I know," Karen said. "I just hate watching you be so calm when I want to throw something." "Your anger is useful," I said. "Save it for when I need it." That night I slept well again, and somewhere across town, I suspect Donald lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what I was going to do, wondering why I wouldn't just take the offer and let him off cleanly, wondering what I knew. Good, let him wonder. They came on a Saturday morning in March, both of them. I had not expected that. I expected Donald perhaps another soft conversation, another strategic offer. I did not expect him to bring Cindy Marsh to my front door. I was in the garden when I heard the car in the driveway. I came around the side of the house, still holding my pruning shears. And there they were. Donald in his weekend clothes, and Cindy, tall, well-dressed, with careful makeup and a cautious smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was holding a paper bag from a bakery I recognized, as though she'd brought pastries to smooth this over. I looked at them both for a moment. The audacity of it was almost impressive. This woman had spent at least a year helping my husband deceive me, and here she stood on my front path with a bakery bag and a rehearsed smile, as though we were neighbors meeting at a street fair. I took off my gardening gloves. "Come in," I said. We sat in the living room. I did not offer coffee. I sat across from them with my hands in my lap, and I waited. Let them set the tone. Let them show me what they'd come to do. Cindy spoke first, which surprised me. Her voice was practiced, warm, measured, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this in a mirror. "Mrs. Holloway, Peggy, I want to say that I understand how painful this must be. And I want you to know that I respect everything you've built, everything you've given to this family." She paused. "Don and I aren't here to fight. We're here because we're worried about you, about what this process is doing to you, and to the grandchildren." The grandchildren. That was the pressure point she'd selected. I noted it carefully. "The grandchildren are fine," I said. Donald leaned forward. "Peggy, if this goes to full discovery, everything becomes public. Your finances, our history, details that could embarrass the whole family. Karen and Robert will be pulled into depositions. Your grandchildren will grow up knowing their grandparents' private lives were aired in a courthouse." He paused for effect. "I'm not threatening you. I'm asking you to consider the cost." "Of the truth?" I said. "Of spectacle," he said. "There's no reason for this to become a spectacle." I looked around my living room while he was talking. The bookshelves I had arranged. The photographs on the side table. Karen's wedding. Robert's graduation. Marcus as a newborn. The lamp I'd found at an estate sale in 2007 that I had always loved. Every object in this room had a history that was mine as much as anyone's, and two people were sitting in it trying to convince me to surrender my legal rights out of concern for appearances. Cindy set the bakery bag on the coffee table. "Peggy, I know you have no reason to trust me. I understand that. But Don has told me what a strong woman you are, how capable. And I genuinely believe, that you could walk away from this with your dignity completely intact and enough resources to live very well. The offer Don made you last week was fair. More than fair, honestly." There it was. The word honestly from a woman who had spent at least a year helping my husband lie to me. She said it without visible irony. I wondered briefly whether she believed her own performance or whether she knew exactly what it was. "Cindy," I said, "I'm going to be straightforward with you. This conversation was designed to make me feel afraid of the process and grateful for the offer. I understand the design. I'm not going to accept the offer, and I'm not going to withdraw from discovery." The warm expression on her face didn't disappear. It just went still, like a photograph of warmth rather than the real thing. "Peggy," Donald started. "Additionally," I said, "I'm going to need you both to leave my property. Whatever communication needs to happen between us now goes through our attorneys." Donald stood up. The careful politeness was gone entirely now. The mask had served its purpose and failed, and there was no further use for it. "You're making a serious mistake. Mitchell is going to bury Tran in paperwork. This will go on for 18 months and cost you everything you think you're protecting." "Then it will go on for 18 months, I said. He stared at me. His jaw tightened in the way it always had when he couldn't control a situation. Cindy stood beside him, and I saw something pass across her face. Not anger, exactly, but a reassessment. She had come here expecting a frightened old woman who could be guided toward compliance with the right combination of warmth and pressure. She had modeled the wrong woman entirely. They left without the bakery bag. I stood at the window and watched the car back out of the driveway and disappear down Palmetto Drive. And then I did feel it. A cold wave of something that was, if I'm honest, fear. Not of Donald specifically, but of the long road ahead. Of 18 months of paperwork, of legal fees accumulating, of confrontations I hadn't yet imagined. The mind, when it is tired, will find the darkest version of the future and hold it up for examination. It lasted about 30 seconds, and then I thought about the manila envelope, the hotel in Savannah, the credit card. A year of deliberate, calculated lies told to my face across this same table. The fear didn't disappear. It transformed. It became the kind of energy that keeps you upright when you'd rather sit down. I picked up the bakery bag and brought it next door to Mrs. Patterson, who was 81 and fond of croissants. Then I called Gloria and told her exactly what had happened, word for word. She listened without interrupting. "Good," she said when I finished. "They're scared. Scared people make mistakes." I went to bed that night knowing she was right. The deposition was held on a Wednesday morning in April at Gloria's office on Broad Street. Donald arrived with Mitchell Pruitt, a heavyset man in his late 50s, with the practiced calm of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Donald himself looked composed. He was wearing his good gray suit. He had the expression of a man who believed he was still holding the better hand, and perhaps he had convinced himself of it. I had watched him convince himself of things before. It was something he was skilled at. I arrived 15 minutes early. I wore a navy dress and my reading glasses and the small pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother. I brought a bottle of water and a legal pad. I had eaten breakfast. I had slept 7 hours. I had done everything a person can do to arrive at a difficult moment in good condition. Gloria sat beside me, her glasses on their chain, her face carrying no expression I could read. That was one of the things I had come to appreciate about her. She did not perform reassurance. She simply prepared, and her preparation spoke for itself. The proceedings were formal and slow, the way legal proceedings always are. Questions, responses, documentation entered into the record. Mitchell asked questions designed to minimize, to present Donald as a man who had made personal mistakes but acted in good faith financially. Donald answered smoothly, carefully, his voice carrying a practiced reasonableness that I recognized from 40 years of watching him manage situations. Then Gloria began. She started with the credit card. She placed the statements on the table, 18 months of charges, arranged chronologically. Hotels, restaurants, the dinner on Sullivan's Island on a Tuesday in October, the weekend in Savannah in September, the jewelry purchase in November for $380. She went through them line by line and asked Donald to identify each one. He acknowledged them with the resigned dignity of a man who had expected this portion and prepared accordingly. He'd had time to construct his explanations. Then she moved to the investment accounts. She presented the comparative analysis her financial consultant had prepared. The accounts should have grown at a predictable rate over the period in question, given the market performance of the specific funds involved. They had not. There was a gap. Not enormous, not the kind of number that makes headlines, but the kind that is deeply meaningful in the context of a 38-year marriage and a retirement income that was never going to be extravagant. Donald's expression did not change, but his hands, resting on the table, went very still. "Mr. Holloway," Gloria said, "can you explain the discrepancy in the Meridian Fund account between February and August of last year?" Mitchell objected. "Technical grounds." Gloria restated the question with precise legal language. Mitchell objected again on different grounds. The stenographer recorded everything with the patient neutrality of someone who has heard this particular rhythm many times before. Then Gloria placed the manila envelope document on the table. Not the original, a certified copy, obtained through the discovery process from the firm that had drafted it. The preliminary asset transfer agreement. Dated 11 months before, Donald had sat across the dinner table from me with pot roast going cold between us and told me he intended to leave me with almost nothing. The document bore his signature on the consultation line. "Can you identify this document?" Gloria asked. Donald looked at it for 3 full seconds. I watched him make calculations. I had seen that expression before, too. Not often, but at moments when he was deciding which version of the truth to offer. "I'd need to review it with my counsel," he said. "You've had 3 weeks to review it," Gloria said. It was produced in discovery response 14 days ago. Take your time. Mitchell put a hand on Donald's arm. They conferred in voices too low for the record. The room was quiet, except for the faint sound of traffic on Broad Street below and the scratch of the stenographer's equipment. When Donald looked up, something had shifted. The composed surface was still present, but it had developed fractures that I could see clearly. I had studied that face for 4 decades. I knew every register it was capable of producing. I had preliminary conversations about financial planning, Donald said. That is a normal part of preparing for a significant life change. The document is dated 11 months before you informed your wife you wanted a divorce, Gloria said. Is that when you began planning the separation? He stopped, reconsidered, started again. Financial planning conversations are private and don't necessarily. The attempted restructuring of joint assets during a period when you had not yet disclosed your intent to divorce would be relevant to questions of marital waste and dissipation, Gloria said, not raising her voice by a single degree. Our financial consultant has prepared a full accounting of what the Meridian Fund should contain versus what it does contain. The difference is approximately $41,000. Donald looked at Mitchell. Something passed between them that was not reassurance. This is a mischaracterization, Donald said. His voice had changed pitch, just slightly. Higher, tighter. The voice of a man who is working much harder than he expected to. The numbers are in the record, Gloria said simply. I made investment decisions, legal investment decisions, in good faith. Unilaterally, with joint assets, without your wife's knowledge, in the year preceding a divorce you had not yet disclosed to her. She let that sit. The court will characterize it accordingly. Donald's composure broke the way ice breaks in March. Not dramatically, but with the unmistakable sound of something that has been under pressure too long finally giving way. His voice went loud and uneven. You don't have the full picture. You have selected documents without context. You are constructing a narrative that is deliberately misleading. Mr. Holloway, the stenographer said quietly. She needed him to slow down. I looked at him across the table. I had spent 40 years loving this man, building beside him, compromising for him, and making myself smaller so that he could feel larger. I looked at him now. Flushed, defensive, his careful story unraveling in a room full of witnesses. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not anger. Just the quiet, settled recognition of the truth, finally occupying the space where the lies had been. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The deposition was not the end. I want to be clear about that, because real life does not conclude in a single dramatic room, and anyone who has been through a legal process knows that the day everything shifts is rarely the day everything resolves. But the deposition was the moment when the trajectory became unmistakable. Not just to me, to Mitchell Pruitt. I had watched Mitchell throughout those hours in Gloria's conference room, the way you watch a professional when the professional thinks no one is studying them. He was good at his job, precise, controlled, never visibly rattled. But there were moments, small ones, when his legal pad sat untouched for a beat too long, when his objections came a half-second slower than before. When Donald looked to him, and the reassurance that came back was more restrained than it had been at the start of the morning. 2 weeks after that Wednesday, Mitchell contacted Gloria and requested a settlement conference. Donald was prepared, he explained, to reconsider his position. Those exact words. The language of retreat, wrapped in professional neutrality. The conference took place in late April in a neutral conference room on Meeting Street. The kind of anonymous beige room that exists specifically for moments when two sides need to meet without the symbolic weight of either party's territory. Donald arrived with Mitchell. He was in the gray suit again. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well, which I noted without satisfaction and without guilt. He had made his choices, and they had weight, and weight accumulates in the body. I arrived with Gloria. I had my water and my legal pad. I had eaten breakfast. I had slept well the night before because I had done everything I could do, and what remained was simply to be present for the outcome. Mitchell presented the revised offer. It was substantially and entirely different from what Donald had announced at the dinner table in January, when he had told me, across 38 years of shared meals, that I would walk away with almost nothing. The house on Palmetto Drive, the wraparound porch, the fig tree, the kitchen where I had cooked 10,000 meals, would transfer fully to me. My teacher's pension remained entirely untouched. I would receive 60% of the joint investment accounts, weighted under South Carolina's equitable distribution standard, for the length of the marriage and my documented career contributions. The position I had turned down, the summers without pay, the years of being the reliable one at home so that Donald could build higher. Donald's retirement account from the firm would be divided through a qualified domestic relations order, and I would receive my full calculated spousal share. The hidden credit card balance, accumulated during the marital period, charged in part to joint funds, would be treated as a marital debt and factored against his portion. And the $41,000 from the Meridian Fund discrepancy, the gap between what should have been there and what was, would be restored to the marital estate before distribution was calculated. Gloria reviewed every term. She asked 3 clarifying questions. She made 2 adjustment requests, both of which Mitchell accepted after conferring with Donald in low voices in the corner of the room. I watched Donald's face during those conferences. He was not a man who accepted things easily. He had spent his whole adult life in the position of the one who determined outcomes. Standing in a corner deferring to his attorney while his attorney negotiated against him was a new geography, and it showed. Then Gloria looked at me across the table. "It's your decision," she said. "I read through the settlement summary myself. I did not rush. I wore my reading glasses, and I went through every line, and when I finished, I went through it again. I was 68 years old, and I had learned, at some cost, that the documents are what matter. Not the promises, not the intentions, not the tone of voice in which things are said across a kitchen table. The documents said, "The house is yours. Your pension is yours. Your share of what was built together is acknowledged and protected." I thought about January, the pot roast, the tone of voice. "You'll walk away with almost nothing." "I'll sign," I said. Donald signed 15 minutes later. He used his own pen, the good one he'd always carried. He did not look at me when he put it to paper. I watched his hand move, and I thought about the 40 years that signature was closing, and I let myself feel the weight of that fully, because I think you owe yourself the truth of a moment, even when the moment is also a relief. The papers went to the court. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in June, the judge approved the settlement. Gloria called me at 9:15. I was deadheading the roses along the back fence when my phone rang. The morning was warm and still, and the garden smelled like it always did in early June, green and a little sweet, and completely itself. "It's done," she said. "Thank you, Gloria," I said, "for all of it." "You came in with documentation and you stayed calm for 6 months," she said. "In my experience, that combination wins more cases than any argument I can make in a courtroom." We agreed to have lunch. I hung up and stood in the garden for a long while, not doing anything in particular, just being there. In the yard that was mine, under the sky that did not care about any of it and was beautiful anyway. Donald celebrated with dinner and friends that evening, I heard later through Karen. He told people the settlement had been mutual. reasonable. He did not mention the deposition. He did not mention the $41,000. He told the story he needed to tell, and I let him tell it. Because the court record exists. Because what happened is documented, witnessed, and permanent. Because some truths don't require announcement. They simply are, waiting patiently for anyone who cares to look. I went back to my roses. The fig tree was full by June, heavy with early fruit. And it was mine. The summer I turned 68 was the best summer I could remember in a long time. I painted the front door of the house on Palmetto Drive, a dark, saturated green, the color of the fig leaves at their fullest. I had wanted to do it for years, and Donald had always said it was too much. Too bold. Not in keeping with the neighborhood, he said, though 3 houses on our street had red doors and nobody complained. Now there was no one to consult and no one to override me. I called the painter on a Tuesday, and by Friday the door was done, and I stood on the porch in the evening light with a glass of iced tea and thought, yes, that is exactly the door this house always wanted, and I should have done it years ago. Karen helped me rearrange the living room the following weekend. We moved furniture that had been in the same position for 17 years, a configuration I had stopped seeing because it had simply always been there. We took a chest of drawers to the consignment shop that I had never liked and replaced it with a small writing desk from an antique market in Somerville. Narrow, with a worn leather surface, and 2 small drawers that smelled like old paper. I put it under the window that faced the garden. The room felt different afterward. Lighter. As though the air could move through it more freely now that nothing was blocking it out of habit. I rejoined my book club with more energy than I'd had in years. Eleanor had told them only what was necessary, that I had been through a difficult period and was well. And they received me back with the practical warmth of women who have seen enough of life to know that it is long and that people survive things and continue. We read 7 books between June and September. I had strong opinions about all of them. It felt good to sit around Eleanor's dining room table on Thursday evenings and argue about characters as though their choices genuinely mattered, which is, I think, precisely why we read in the first place. My grandson, Marcus, who was 9, started coming over on Saturday mornings to help me in the garden. He was not technically very helpful. He pulled up 2 plants he was certain were weeds that were not, and he watered things with an enthusiasm that bordered on flooding. But he asked questions constantly and remembered the answers. And by August, he could name 6 plants correctly and tell you something specific about each one. His younger sister, Olivia, preferred to sit on the porch and provide authoritative commentary on the proceedings below. Their visits made the house loud in the way I had forgotten a house was supposed to be loud when it is being lived in properly with people who belong in it. In August, I booked a trip I had wanted to take for 20 years. 2 weeks in Ireland with Eleanor. We flew into Dublin, rented a small car that Eleanor drove with a confidence I chose not to examine too closely, and spent 14 days moving slowly through the countryside with no fixed itinerary and no particular agenda. We stayed in farmhouses and small hotels where the breakfasts were enormous and the hosts were kind. We walked on cliff paths along the western coast, where the Atlantic came in gray and enormous and indifferent. And the wind was the kind that makes you feel genuinely small in a way that is, somehow, deeply comforting. I was 68 years old on those cliff paths, with Eleanor laughing beside me at something she'd read on a hand-painted sign outside a pub, and I thought, I am not someone's aftermath. I am not diminished. I am completely, entirely here. As for Donald, I want to tell this part without cruelty, because what happened to him was not something I arranged. It was simply the ordinary, unglamorous way that choices accumulate over time and quietly become a life. He and Cindy moved into a condo in Mount Pleasant, near the marina. He had paid for most of it with his portion of the settlement. Cindy was 45 with her own expectations about what this chapter would look like, and Donald was 71 with a knee that needed replacing and a cardiac event. Small but real, that arrived in September and required a hospital stay and a new set of restrictions. The man she had known over dinners and weekend trips was not quite the same man who needed help rising from low chairs and fell asleep before 9. That is one of the oldest stories there is. The version of a person that exists in an affair is never the complete version, and eventually the complete version is all that remains. Robert told me about the heart situation carefully, watching my face as he spoke. I told him I was sorry to hear it, and I meant it. In the modest, honest way you can feel sorry for someone who hurt you, without that sorrow meaning you regret having protected yourself. Karen had arrived at something harder and cleaner than forgiveness, which I thought was exactly right for her particular kind of intelligence. She loved her father because he was her father. She did not pretend he had been other than what he was. She saw him on holidays and called on his birthday, and did not require him to be a different person in order to maintain a relationship with him. I was proud of her for that. It is more difficult than either resentment or unconditional forgiveness, and more honest than either. I did not think about Donald and Cindy very often. I thought about my green door, my garden. Marcus learning the name of the fig tree in Latin because I told him plants had 2 names, and he found that remarkable and worth remembering. I thought about Ireland and the cliff paths and Eleanor laughing in the wind. I thought about how much life was still ahead and how entirely, completely, it belonged to me. People ask me, why did you give him everything so calmly? I didn't give him everything. I gave him the story he wanted to tell, while keeping what was actually mine. Here is what I learned. Panic is a gift you give to the person trying to defeat you. Documentation is your real attorney, and patience, real, deliberate patience, is not weakness. It is the longest lever there is. If someone has ever told you that you'll walk away with nothing, I want you to remember this story. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening.